All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to trace the absolutely brilliant, step-by-step logical argument that Charles Darwin used to introduce natural selection to the world. I mean, think about it. When you have a theory that completely upends how humanity views its place in the universe, how exactly do you pitch that? Put yourself in the year 1859. Darwin knew his theory of evolution was going to clash, and clash heavily, with the dominant views of his time. If he just walked out and said, "Hey everyone, all species descended from common ancestors," the pushback would have been immediate. It would have been overwhelming. He needed a highly strategic starting point, a foundation so universally accepted that his readers literally couldn't reject it right out of the gate. So what did he do? Instead of kicking things off with super controversial claims about human ancestors or the origins of life, he started with domestic animals, specifically pigeons. It's genius, really. This was a subject that was completely familiar to his 19th century audience. Darwin himself actually bred a ton of different pigeons. And by using something that everyday farmers and breeders worked with all the time, he built this clever bridge of logic that his readers could comfortably walk across. Now, what's truly fascinating is how he used pigeons as this spectacular demonstration of change. Think about this single wild rock pigeon. Then look at the wildly varying domestic breeds. Darwin pointed out some really striking differences. We're talking completely different body sizes, drastically altered beak lengths, vastly different plumage, completely unique skull shapes, and varied wingspans. Honestly, some of these domestic breeds looked so incredibly different that a casual observer might think they were entirely distinct species. But Darwin firmly maintained they all descended from that one wild rock pigeon. It was a pretty bold claim back then, but one that modern genetics has proven absolutely right. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that human breeders don't actually create these variations out of thin air. They merely choose them. Every single generation, a farmer looks at their livestock and breeds the individuals that just happen to have the characteristics they want. They select for, say, more abundant wool in sheep, improved milk production in cattle, maybe increased speed in horses, or a particular docility in dogs. By repeating this process of choice over tens or even hundreds of generations, well, those traits become more and more pronounced. Darwin actually coined a term for this process, artificial selection, and it was such a brilliant, completely unthreatening stepping stone for his readers. He wasn't talking about abstract, untestable science yet, right? He was grounding his theory in everyday human activity. He showed them that significant, undeniable physical change in a population was entirely possible without the sudden magical creation of new, independent species. To make this whole artificial selection thing work, Darwin hammered home one essential foundational observation: no individual is identical to another. I know, it sounds super obvious to us now, but it's literally the engine of his entire theory. He noted that even within the exact same litter, born from the exact same parents, there are natural differences. One pup might be slightly larger, another might be a different color, another faster, or more robust, or maybe more fertile. The point is, nature provides the variation, humans just pick the winners. And this right here, this perfectly illustrates Darwin's absolute genius as an observer. When you compare his notes to modern science, it's honestly mind-blowing. Darwin perfectly identified hereditary variability. He knew that some traits passed from parents to offspring while others just disappeared. But he figured this all out while being totally ignorant of modern genetic mechanisms. He didn't know a thing about DNA mutations. He had no clue about genetic recombination during reproduction. Even Mendel's groundbreaking genetic laws were being figured out at the exact same time, but they were completely ignored by the wider scientific community. Darwin saw the pattern without ever seeing the genetic code. Okay, let's see how this all builds up. Once Darwin firmly established the undeniable reality of artificial selection on the farm, he shifted gears. He took this rock-solid logic from the farmyard and applied it to wild organisms. He started looking at the incredible diversity of Galapagos finches, the turtles on different islands, complex orchids, and all sorts of various beetles. He noticed that out in the wild, the boundaries between a species, a variety, and a subspecies really blurs depending on their environment. Some populations show these gradual, progressive differences based on exactly where they live, which, of course, prompts the big revolutionary question: how on earth do these adaptations occur without a creative plan or a human breeder making the choices? Who or what is doing the selecting? To answer that, Darwin looked at reproduction. He observed that organisms overproduce at a massive, almost incomprehensible scale. Think about it. A single oak tree doesn't just drop 1 or 2 acorns, right? It drops thousands. A single cod swimming in the ocean can lay several million eggs. Plants spread tens of thousands of seeds. Which leads us to a pretty obvious question. If a single cod lays millions of eggs, why isn't the ocean totally overflowing with cod? Why isn't the entire planet covered in a mild, thick layer of oak trees? Well, because despite this massive overproduction, populations actually remain relatively stable over long periods. And that means facing one really harsh reality. The vast, overwhelming majority of those offspring die before they ever get a chance to reproduce. This leads to a state of permanent, inescapable competition. Darwin called this the struggle for existence. Now, this struggle isn't always some dramatic, bloody fight, tooth and claw. A lot of times, the competition for food, water, light, space, territories, and breeding partners is incredibly discreet. It might just be a plant growing a tiny bit faster to steal the sunlight from its neighbor. Or maybe it's two trees competing silently beneath the soil with their roots. Or two birds trying to exploit the exact same tiny population of insects. Competition is literally everywhere. This relentless struggle for resources leads directly to the concept of fitness. While Darwin didn't actually use the modern term fitness value, this is exactly what he was describing. It's so vital to understand that fitness is really about the relative reproductive success of an individual within a given environment. It's not just about being the biggest or the fastest or the strongest. If you have a massive, powerful animal that happens to be sterile, its evolutionary fitness is zero. But a small, maybe seemingly weaker animal that is highly fertile and leaves behind numerous viable offspring, that animal has fantastic fitness. Natural selection favors traits that increase the number of viable offspring. I want to pause here for a second to clear up a major misconception about evolution. A lot of people think evolution is completely random. Well, that's only half true. Genetic mutations, those little variations that pop up in a population, they do appear largely at random. Darwin knew variations appeared even if he didn't quite know their origin. But the environment's filtering of those traits, the actual selection part, that is absolutely not random. It is entirely driven by the strict necessities of the environment. Let's look at a modern example that brilliantly illustrates Darwin's exact logic, happening in real time right now: antibiotic resistance. So, Step 1, in a population of bacteria, a random mutation occurs that just so happens to make a few individuals resistant. Step 2, we apply an antibiotic. Step 3, the environment has now changed. The susceptible bacteria die off while the resistant ones survive. Step 4, those surviving resistant bacteria multiply. The antibiotic didn't create the resistance out of nowhere, it merely acted as this harsh filter for a random variation that was already there. It's a perfect modern parallel. And this was Darwin's true revolutionary genius. He took ordinary, observable phenomena, the simple facts that offspring vary, that organisms reproduce in massive numbers, and that they absolutely must compete to survive. He proved that these entirely ordinary rules, when accumulated over immense, staggering periods of time, are entirely sufficient to create the remarkable adaptations and new species we see all around us today. He completely removed the need for an independent, creative plan for every single species on Earth. Darwin showed us that the environment is the ultimate breeder, constantly shaping life generation after generation. So I'll leave you with this thought. If nature's blind, unthinking filter can completely transform a wild rock pigeon into hundreds of wildly different breeds, what ancient adaptations, born from millions of years of invisible struggles, are still shaping your biology and your behavior today? As you look out at the natural world, keep asking yourself how the unseen pressures of the past continue to dictate the survival of the future.